Hello, in this tutorial I'm gonna teach you how to build a simple generative music system in Unreal. And what are you gonna learn here? So I'm gonna show you how to create a simple ambient music MetaSounds. I'm gonna show you how we can modularize these systems, keep it more flexible so that it's gonna be easier to do future maintenance, changing some stuff so that we get different feelings or different kind of uh, music being played out by the same system, and we're gonna show you how to interact with the system at runtime. So how we can, while the game is playing, modify how the system is playing the music. Just very briefly, my name is Marco. I'm an associate professor at the STU Meta Lab. I did a PhD in music generation games, and I currently do research in artificial intelligence and procedural content generation applied to games. You're welcome to take a look at more of my stuff at this link. The inspiration, very briefly, for this music system is kind of twice-fold. One is from Brian Eno's Music Airports, kind of like a classic in ambient music. And the other one is Steve Reich with this It's Gonna Rain compositions. Steve Reich did a lot of interesting stuff um, in phase shifting music, and this is very inspired by that. All right, let's get to it then. Okay, first of all, I just opened the basic first person project in Unreal just to have something to play with, but we're not really going to act that much within the scene. So let's start by building the basis of our music system. If we right click in the content browser and we start typing MetaSound, you can find MetaSound source. That's what we want. Start to that. Um, Given my inspiration, I'm gonna call this airport music and double click it to open it up. All right, so this is the MetaSound interface. If you're familiar with blueprints, you see that it's pretty similar to the normal blueprint one. We have as an input right now this on play trigger that starts when the game is started. And we have right now a mono output. We're gonna do something about that maybe later on. And then we have an output that sends trigger on finished. You notice this gives us warning, says that it's because this is a one-shot meta sound, so a sound that should happen and then stop. But we don't want this. We actually want something that keeps looping, since we want to make a background music generator. So to fix this, you go over here in interfaces. You can see that we have the one-shot interface. We want to remove that. We're not actually using it. So click on the little bin icon here, and there we go. Now that's fine. That's fixed. Okay, so let's start by just doing something simple. Let's make our music generator just make one note, and then we'll start building up on that. So if you want to create sound, you could use a samples, of course, but I would like us to try to do everything generatively. So we're just gonna create sound from the sound waves from scratch. Thankfully, MetaSound has a lot of interesting things that we can use already. So if you right click and then you search for synth, see we have quite a lot of generators here. Let's start with a sine wave generator just to test. Get this box. We have audio output. Let's connect output. And let's try to just press play now. We can hear the sine wave at frequency 440. So that seems to work. Of course, it's a little bit, boring, but it's first step. Okay, what if we want something different than just this frequency? We could, of course, just change the frequency manually, but I think most of us have difficulties remembering the frequencies of each note. So thankfully, there is something we can do. We can instead use a MIDI input. So we can find a MIDI to frequency box. There we go. And attach this. If you're not familiar with MIDI notation, it's just an int, like a whole number, and each number represents one note. So 60 is a middle C, 61 would be a C sharp, 62 would be a D, and so on and so on. So if we try to play now, now we have this middle C playing. And if we change this to 62 and play again, now we have D playing. Okay, good enough for a start, but it's still a bit boring. Like, this sound is not very interesting to listen to because it's just a sine wave that's not really that interesting. So let's see if we can do something better for this. Let's delete the sine wave generator and instead put a different synth. MetaSound has this additive synth, which is quite cool. I'm going to show you how that works. So here we have a bass frequency, same as before, we can connect that. And then the way that additive synth works is that it adds frequencies on top of each other using sine waves. So we have to kind of tell it which frequencies needs to come in using this harmonic multipliers input. And then also how strongly do those frequencies have to be in this addition using the amplitudes. Let's try to see what happens if we just connected the output and try to play it. Nothing happens. We get silence because we're not actually telling it to multiply anything in there, not to add any frequency. So what we need to do is add something that goes here. If we bring this back, we can make a variable, so promote to graph variable. Now we have the harmonic multiplier over here. And we do the same for amplitudes. Actually, I'm going to wait for a second with this. Let's see what happens when we just start adding the harmonic multipliers. So we see one thing at a time. So if we say 1, that is the same as the base frequency that's inputted. So if we press play now, we're just getting the frequency in input multiplied by 1, so itself, and out. Not really that interesting. Let's try to add a new element to our array. We could say, for example, 1.5. Let's see what happens now. Now we have two frequencies summed together, the original one and then one that's 1.5, the original frequency. Let's add a few more and see how this changes. 2. And then add a few more again, 2.5, let's say. And let's say 3. Okay, now we get something that's not that nice, right? Because we have added a lot of different frequencies together, all at the same kind of level. And that's where the amplitudes input comes into place. That allows us to weight them so that some will have a larger influence than the other. So I'm gonna again promote it to a graph variable. And here, now if we press play again, nothing happened because we haven't put anything in the amplitudes yet. Let's do that. Now we can add, say, 1 for the base frequency, 0.75 for the next one, 0.5, 0.35, 0.25. So this means that we are going further and further. As we go further and further away from the base frequency, we're reducing the volume of that specific frequency. See what happens? That's much better. It's a bit more interesting timbre-wise than the original, but it's still pleasant enough to hear. All right, so now we have something that makes some sounds, but it's not really working in the normal sense of an instrument where we get like a note that starts and then continues for a while and then disappears, stops playing. So how can we do that? Well, we can do that using something that's called an envelope, and thankfully within MetaSounds we do have this as already coded. So if you search for envelope, there's a lot of options. which the one we're gonna use is this AD envelope. AD stands for attack delay, meaning that when we get a trigger coming in, there's gonna be some specific attack time that brings our sound from 0 volume to full volume, and then some decay time over which the sound goes from the maximum volume to the minimum. So for example, we could do this by attaching it to our onPlay trigger. And then this is the out envelope. We want to kind of mix these two together because we want to make sure that the output of our synth is kind of controlled, or the volume is controlled by the envelope. So if you look for multiply, you can find multiply audio. There we go. Then we can attach the output of the synth, that multiplied by the envelope, and then get it out. Let's see what happens. See that it's a very short sound because it goes up to the maximum in 0.01 seconds, and then it decays in 1 second. We want something a bit more moody, I would say, for this kind of ambient generator. So I'm gonna change the attack time to be 1. So it takes a little bit to go to full volume. And I'm gonna change the decay time to 10. So it's gonna take a long time to die off. There we go. You see it takes very long time, 10 seconds to get down. So now we would want 4 of these so that we have 4 music generators or 4 note generators that we can play at the same time. We could take these and just duplicate them, having 4 of these copies, but that's gonna become a little bit messy. So I think that the best way to do this is to modularize it so that we can use this in the future and have it to be a bit more expandable as well. So what we want to do is to open our content drawer again. And if you right click and go to audio, one of the options, and you go down to MetaSound, is a MetaSound patch. A patch is basically a container that can become one of these boxes we use in MetaSound. So let's call this AM synth, because it's the synth for our airport music. Double click it. You can see that the interface is pretty much the same. So let's go back to this. I'm gonna copy all of these. Oh, actually, I think I want to copy pretty much everything and paste it into the synth. There we go. So let's see, we need an output. Guess I could have copied that as well. And this is audio. There we go. And then right now, this synth will always play this specific note. That's probably not great because we want to make sure that we can play different notes. We want this to be a control, so we kind of have to have an input here. Call it note. There we go. That should be fine. Now we can actually decide a note to input in, pass it on, and then everything else will work. And the other thing we're missing is that we need a trigger as well, because the note only starts playing when this envelope is triggered. Right now we don't have one, but we can promote to graph input. See, now we have a trigger over there. And now I think we should be pretty good. So let's save, go back to airport music. And now we kind of want to replace all of this with the one we just made. So if I look for synth now, I can see that now this AM synth is an option. Click it. I can click it. I can remove all of this stuff. And now we can choose our note, 60, send in our trigger, attach the output, and there we go. We have modularized this so that now we can also duplicate it. And now we have 4 nice synths pretty quickly, right? And we can, of course, increase the amount, decrease the amount to whatever we want with these. All right, so now that we have our synths, we need to connect them and we need to sum up their output. So if we trigger them all like this, then we would want to connect all of these output, but you can see that this output only takes one channel. So we need to mix them up somehow. And I say mix because what we want is a mixer. I say mix because what we want is a mixer. So if you try to search for mix, we can find a lot of them, mono or stereo mixers. And notice that this number next to it is the amount of inputs it has. So in this case, we have 4 sounds, 4 synths, so we can use a mono mixer with 4. Now we can attach our outputs. And something is a bit off, right? Now we get like this very distorted sound because we're summing up all of these at the same kind of level. We want to fix that. We can scale them using a gain. So I think since we have 4 of them, let's just multiply them all by 0.5. So even in the worst case scenario, we didn't get too noisy. And now that works pretty okay. Now, what about the notes? We have here just playing the same note over and over. We could, of course, change it ourselves, putting in some different notes that we want, and see what happens. That's pretty moody, but again, this doesn't seem very practical, right? That you have to change this all the time. So I think what you can do, or what we can do, is to have some inputs that we can change here so that we can decide what these notes are. I would suggest we do this using an array. So let's make a new input. Let's call it notes. It's a float, but we also want it to be an array. And now we can add some different values here. We'll do that in a moment. But now that we have an array over here, we kind of have to unpack it to send the different nodes to the different synths. You can do this by using the get. In this case, we're doing float, so get a float in an array. And you can see here we can get inputs, we can connect the output, and we have to say which index. Remember that arrays in blueprints or in programming in general usually start from 0, so this would be the first item of the array. And we do the same, we duplicate this so we can do it for all of our synthesizers. So we connect all the inputs, connect the outputs, and change the indexes. So this gets on rate index 1, index 2, and index 3. There we go. So let's add some actual values inside this one, some default values that could be changed later on. So if you click on nodes in inputs and you go down to default value, we need 4 values. I'm gonna just put in something that I think would sound nice. together. And but you can play around with this. You can put whatever numbers you want and try to see what kind of different sounds you get. So if we try to play it now, it's working. You can hear that we have some kind of mix of different notes coming in, but we are still not really playing the notes differently. We just have them all start at the same time and end at the same time. What we want is to put them a little bit out of loop. So we have different phases for the different notes so that they would create um, some emerging kind of music. So the next step is to take this trigger we have in input and create different looping phases for it. Okay, let's do the looping phases now. So what we need to do is to take this one trigger that comes in and make it so that it's repeating at different speeds. Thankfully, that's also something that's pretty simple. So if you try to search for trigger repeat, there we go. You can get this box. Just gonna remove these so that we start with a blank slate from that. Maybe make some more space. We can tell this trigger repeat when to start, when we start a game. Then we have a repeat out. This is a trigger that's gonna come periodically at a specific period. And we can just kind of duplicate this again and do this 4 times so that we have 4 repeating triggers playing for us. So let's connect, start all of them. Let's connect the repeat out to the different synthesizers we have. And then we need to put them out of phase. So I have something different for all of these. Let's say that I'm gonna say this a period of 10 seconds. Second one will be 15. That's gonna be 7 and 12. Again, you can play with these numbers and see what kind of differences you get. Let's try to see what happens now. You can see that there are signals coming in and we get this very nice moody soundtrack where all the sounds kind of get mixed but not at a specific period, so they're not really looping that much. Very nice. I think it's quite moody. Right. Then I think we are technically kind of done. This does what we said on the can. It just creates this ambient soundtrack where we have notes playing at different phases that create this moody feeling. Personally, I think we could do something a little bit nicer here. I don't like the output so much because it's a mono output. So let's try to see very quickly if we can make this a little bit more interesting sound-wise. So if we want to make this into a stereo output, first of all, we can see that out here we have mono in the outputs, which is not exactly what we want. To change this, to change which output, which kind of output we get from the MetaSound, whether it's mono or stereo, we have to go into the MetaSound settings up here. Click on that, then you can see that this panel pops out, and here we can say stereo output. Now we get 2 outputs created, one for left and one for right. But our output of the system is still mono. So we could, in theory, connect them like this, but nothing is going to change. It's just going to be, it's just going to sound exactly the same as before. So I suggest we try to just add a little bit of a delay between the two channels just to create something a little bit more interesting. So if you look for delay, there is a delay box. I'm just gonna take the output of our system, delayed by just very little, let's say 0.2 seconds. And then I'm gonna add another delay, this time a stereo delay, which this time has, as you can see, left and right output. This delay is mono, so it still gives you just one output. And I'm gonna take the output of this, put it in the left channel, the output of our system, put it in the right channel, and there we go. I'm gonna change a few of these settings. I don't think we should have a lot of delay here. And for these different values, you can play around a bit with that. I'm just gonna put something that I think sounds nice to me, but you can play around with that. See how it sounds now? Nice. I think that's much better. You can see here from the levels that it's not exactly the same anymore, so the two channels are a bit out of sync, and I think that creates an even more moodier feel on the output. Much better in my opinion. We're now at the final step, which is to actually take this system we created and put it in the scene. So let's make a new blueprint class, choose actor. I'm gonna call it BP Airport Music, and let's open it up. We don't actually need to do much here. We need to add a new component to the actor, an audio component. And then once you select the audio component, we need to choose which sound it should play. In our case, it is our airport music MetaSound. Save, compile, and then let's put it in the scene. And actually that's all there is to it. Let's try to play. You can hear it's working. We can move around, do whatever we want, all kinds of stuff. And our music system is playing around. So the last thing I wanted to show you is that while it's very easy to put things in the scene as it is, one of the cool things about these type of systems is that we can actually interact with them as we play in real time. So let's try to add a little bit of that. If we want to change these, we need to send a message to the audio component. So we can drag in the audio component, and then we need to be able to tell it to change something. You can do this using the set parameter. You see there's quite a few of them, depending on what parameters you want to set. In our case, the inputs for the nodes were a float array. So you need to choose the set float array parameter. And then we need to give it a name. So we call this, let me just open it up. See that? Open up airport music. See that we have this input called notes. We need to give it that specific name. One thing to keep in mind here is that this is case sensitive. So be careful that you need to write the name exactly as the variable is called. And then we need to give it some value. I'm just gonna create a variable. So let's promote this to a variable. Maybe change the name to something better. Notes. We need to trigger this. So we could trigger it when we start playing, for example, but that doesn't seem that. I mean, we can do it for testing, but I would actually rather show you that we can do this in real time as the game is playing. So I'm just going to attach it to the overlap, actor begin overlap. To trigger this event, we actually need to have something to detect collisions. So if we go into components and we add a collision, a box collision, Let's go back into the viewport so we can see it. Let's set it up to 3 by 3. Save and compile. Go back to our level. You can actually see that there isn't really any variable there, so something must have gone wrong. Let's open the airport music again. Oh, and we can see here that notes the variable we created is not public, not visible. Let's click on that. Now we can see that the eye is open and public. Save, compile. And now we can find it over there. So let's create a new array here. 3, 2, 60. Play it now. We get the default music that we were hearing before. But if we move into the collider over there, now we get something different. The notes have changed. And we get another different vibe, let's say. You can see how it's pretty simple to change things up with this system. Finally, here's a version of the MetaSound where I try to just comment things out a little bit to highlight the different parts. So just as the last thing, when we start a patch, so on play, we create the looping triggers with the different periods as we saw before. Then we take the input nodes and unpack them so that we can send each of them individually to the synthesizer. And finally, the output of the 4 synthesizers is put together in a mix, and then a bit of post-processing is used to delay them and create a stereo output. Thank you very much for following through the tutorial. I hope you learned something and I hope you had fun.